People think the loudest person in the room holds all the power. They are wrong. True power appears the moment the quietest person decides to stop funding your delusions. After 2 years of paying his way, my boyfriend slammed his brother's massive debt on my kitchen table, demanding I pay up or get out. He expected a fight. He did not know he had just handed me the perfect scissors to cut his puppet strings forever. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Kennedy Fox. I am 29 years old, and my life is built on order, logic, and undeniable facts. As a senior data analyst at Meridian Core Analytics, my entire career revolves around identifying patterns, assessing risks, and eliminating variables that do not serve the bottom line. I am paid to be cold, principled, and utterly objective. Yet, for 2 exhausting years, I allowed the most toxic variable of all to corrupt my personal life. His name was Julian. Julian was 32 years old, though he carried the entitlement of a spoiled teenager. For 24 agonizing months, I had been the sole financial pillar of our relationship. I paid the exorbitant rent for our high-end downtown apartment, a lease securely and exclusively in my name. I bought the organic groceries he demanded, covered the skyrocketing utilities, and funded his endless networking dinners at 5-star restaurants. All of this was supposedly an investment in his visionary tech startup. It was a grand delusion I funded so he could play the role of a brilliant chief executive officer while actively doing nothing but draining my bank accounts and sketching worthless diagrams on an overpriced whiteboard. I convinced myself it was temporary. I told myself I was being supportive. But the weight of his financial parasitism had become a suffocating blanket, slowly pressing the life out of me. The breaking point did not arrive with a dramatic scream. It arrived on a perfectly quiet Friday evening. I had just finished a brutal 60-hour work week, navigating complex corporate data structures. The apartment was completely silent, a rare and precious commodity. The city lights flickered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was sitting at the kitchen island, nursing a glass of ice water, finally letting the deep, chronic tension bleed out of my shoulders. Then, the front door swung open violently, crashing against the wall guard. Julian strutted into the foyer as if he owned the building. Trailing closely behind him was his older brother, Marcus. The heavy, abrasive thud of luggage hitting the polished hardwood floor echoed painfully through the space. 1, 2, 3, 4 massive, scuffed suitcases. Marcus immediately dropped a stained duffel bag onto my pristine white rug, kicking off his heavy boots with zero hesitation or regard for his surroundings. I stood up, the peaceful silence of the room shattering instantly. Julian did not offer a greeting. He did not ask how my grueling day was. He did not even have the basic decency to pull me aside into the bedroom for a private conversation. Instead, he marched straight into the kitchen, his boots tracking street dirt across the floor, and slammed a thick, worn manila envelope onto the marble counter. "Marcus is moving in with us," Julian announced. His voice held no room for debate. It was not a request. It was a royal decree. I stared at the 4 towering suitcases blocking my hallway, then looked back at the man I had financially supported for over 700 days. "Moving in," I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerously steady whisper. "Permanently," Julian confirmed, puffing out his chest and crossing his arms. He reached into the battered envelope and forcefully pulled out a dense stack of crumpled papers. He tossed them onto the kitchen table. They slid across the smooth marble surface, stopping mere inches from my resting hands. I looked down, my eyes scanning the documents with the same rapid efficiency I used at work. They were bills. Multiple statements for severely overdue credit cards maxed out to the absolute limit, final collection notices printed on harsh red paper, and a massive itemized invoice for vehicular damage compensation directly under Marcus's name. The total amount printed at the bottom was absolutely staggering. It was tens of thousands of dollars in pure, reckless liability. Julian planted his feet, looking down his nose at me with an air of absolute, unearned superiority. "Family is the #1 priority," he dictated, his tone dripping with condescension and arrogance. "You take care of paying these off, and if you do not like it, the door is right there. You can move out." The air in the room grew completely, terrifyingly still. The suffocating weight I had felt for 2 years suddenly vanished, replaced by a vacuum of cold reality. In the living room, Marcus was already smirking from the couch, grabbing the television remote and acting like the lord of the manor. Julian stood in front of me, hands resting aggressively on his hips, thoroughly convinced that his dominance was firmly established. He expected me to cry tears of frustration. He expected me to shout, to throw my hands in the air, or to beg him to reconsider so we could reach some pathetic compromise where I only paid 50% of his brother's disastrous debts. He did not know who he was dealing with. Instead of panic, a profound and icy clarity washed over my mind. In that single, quiet moment, the blinders completely fell away. My analytical brain processed the incoming data flawlessly. I was not a cherished girlfriend. I was not an equal partner. I was merely non-refundable venture capital. I was a limitless walking credit line designed to sustain his illusions of grandeur and feed his empty, hollow pride. He had brought his brother into my sanctuary and handed me the executioner's bill, fully believing I was too weak, too compliant, and too deeply invested to walk away. I felt absolutely no urge to weep. The long-suppressed anger inside me did not boil over into a messy, emotional rage. It crystallized into absolute zero. I did not raise my voice, and I did not offer a single, useless word of argument. I simply reached out and picked up the thick stack of financial ruin. I squared the edges of the paper neatly by tapping them against the cold marble counter. I looked straight up into Julian's eyes. I saw the smug, arrogant confidence resting there, entirely oblivious to the fact that he had just handed me the weapon for his own destruction. "Understood," I said softly. Julian smirked. He honestly believed my 2 softly spoken words were a white flag of complete surrender. He turned and clapped his brother on the shoulder, a triumphant and aggressive gesture of 2 men who had just conquered a kingdom they did not build and did not deserve. "We are going out to celebrate," Julian announced to the room, not even bothering to look at me. He reached into the decorative ceramic bowl by the entryway and snatched my silver platinum card. It was the supplementary credit card tied directly to my primary financial account. "Do not wait up for us, and make sure those accounts are entirely settled by Monday morning." Marcus let out a loud, obnoxious laugh, already boasting loudly about ordering the most expensive dry-aged steak on the restaurant menu. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them. The heavy brass deadbolt slid into place with a definitive thud. The silence returned to the apartment, but this time it was not suffocating. It was a blank canvas. I did not shed a single tear. My heart rate did not even elevate. There was absolutely no time for mourning a relationship that had realistically died many months ago. Instead, I walked straight into my home office, sat in my ergonomic chair, and woke up my laptop. The monitor illuminated the dark room, casting a cold, calculating blue glow over my face. It was time to initiate a complete, systematic, and entirely legal financial demolition. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with the ruthless precision of a military surgeon. First, the banking portal. I securely logged into our joint checking account. Over the past 2 years, I had deposited 99% of the funds in that specific account. Julian's monetary contributions were practically non-existent, usually just pocket change from his failed app ideas. With 3 deliberate clicks, I executed a wire transfer, moving every single cent of my deposited income into a secure private offshore account that he knew absolutely nothing about. I watched the screen refresh. The joint balance dropped instantly to exactly $0.00. Next, I navigated to the credit card management dashboard. I located the specific supplementary card Julian was currently holding in his pocket to buy his brother overpriced meat. I hovered my cursor over the security lock icon and clicked it firmly. The card was instantly frozen. I took a brief moment to visualize the waiter returning to their fancy table in about 45 minutes, shaking his head and handing back the utterly useless piece of plastic. The embarrassment would be his first appetizer. Then came the household utilities. I pulled up the vendor accounts for the electricity, the municipal water, and the high-speed fiber internet. I systematically canceled every single automated payment directive. I removed my routing numbers and deleted my billing addresses. I did not shut the services off completely tonight, as that would take several business days to process. But without my linked accounts, the impending billing cycle would crash directly into a massive wall of insufficient funds. The luxury apartment lease required a much more calculated approach. I opened a new email draft addressed directly to the building's executive property management team. Julian had never bothered to read the 50-page lease agreement when we signed it. If he had actually paid attention, he would have known about Section 4, Paragraph B. It explicitly stated that harboring an unauthorized permanent resident for more than 48 hours constituted a material breach of the legal contract. This specific loophole allowed the primary leaseholder to trigger an immediate, penalty-free early termination of the agreement. I attached a time-stamped security camera screenshot from the hallway system, clearly showing Marcus dragging his 4 massive suitcases through the front door. I formally requested the immediate termination of my tenancy due to illegal occupation, officially absolving myself of all future financial liability. I hit send. The final digital strike was undeniably the most satisfying. Julian drove a pristine luxury sport utility vehicle. He loved to parade it around his networking events, projecting the false image of a highly successful tech entrepreneur. However, my name was the only one listed on the financing agreement. I was the sole legal guarantor. I found the 24-hour customer service number for the auto finance company and dialed. "Hello," I said clearly and calmly when the representative answered the line. "I need to arrange a voluntary vehicle surrender. Yes, effective immediately. I am the primary guarantor, and I can no longer secure the asset. The vehicle is currently parked in the lower resident garage of the Meridian Tower, spot number 112. I will leave the spare electronic key with the night concierge." The representative confirmed the exact details. The repossession tow truck was officially scheduled to arrive the very next day. With the digital infrastructure completely dismantled, I moved swiftly to the physical realm. I grabbed my durable travel bags from the top shelf of the bedroom closet. I gave myself exactly 3 hours to erase my physical presence from the apartment. I packed strictly what belonged to me: my professional wardrobe, my personal electronics, my jewelry, and my essential legal documents. I moved with total efficiency, leaving behind the expensive designer furniture I had purchased, the high-end kitchen appliances, and every single item that had Julian's parasitic aura attached to it. They were sunk costs. I was cutting my losses now to maximize my future peace of mind. By the time the digital clock on the kitchen microwave read 4 o'clock in the morning, my bags were neatly lined up by the front door. The sprawling apartment felt like a cold museum exhibit of a life I used to tolerate. Before walking out into the crisp, pre-dawn air, I pulled a small, yellow sticky note from the kitchen counter. I uncapped my pen and wrote a brief, incredibly factual message. I placed the note squarely in the center of the kitchen island, right next to the heavy brass house key. The note read, "Moved out as requested." I picked up my bags, stepped out into the quiet hallway, and never looked back. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the exact spot where I used to sit. From what the building concierge later relayed to me, Julian woke up around 11 o'clock in the morning. He stretched, scratched his stomach, and wandered into the kitchen, fully expecting the aroma of freshly brewed artisanal coffee and a hot breakfast waiting for him. Instead, he found the cold marble island, my brass house key, and the glaring yellow sticky note. He actually laughed. He picked up the piece of paper, flicked it with his finger, and smirked. In his mind, my departure was nothing more than a pathetic, theatrical tantrum. He genuinely believed that within 48 hours, I would be dragging my bags back through the front door, weeping apologies, and begging for his forgiveness while writing a massive check to clear his brother's debts. He casually tossed the note into the trash can, entirely unbothered, and went to wake up his brother. Their first collision with harsh reality happened exactly at noon. Marcus had insisted on immediately upgrading his gaming setup. They strolled into a premium electronics boutique down the street, acting like newly minted millionaires. Marcus piled a high-performance gaming tower, dual curved monitors, and a mechanical keyboard onto the checkout counter. The total rang up to nearly $5,000. Julian, playing the role of the generous provider, smoothly pulled out the platinum card from his wallet and tapped it against the payment terminal. The machine let out a sharp, unpleasant beep. The screen flashed a bright red error message. Declined. Julian chuckled nervously, blaming a bank security glitch. He instructed the heavily tattooed cashier to run the card manually. The cashier obliged, typing in the numbers with a bored expression. Another sharp beep. Declined. A line of impatient customers began to form behind them. The cashier handed the useless plastic back to Julian with a look of pure, unadulterated pity. Humiliated and confused, Julian grabbed his brother by the arm, leaving the mountain of expensive electronics behind, and practically sprinted out of the store. They power-walked back to the Meridian Tower, fuming and cursing my name. But the universe was not finished delivering the punchlines. As they approached the luxurious glass facade of the apartment lobby, a massive, heavy-duty flatbed tow truck blocked the valet driveway. And there, dangling humiliatingly from the hydraulic lift, was Julian's pristine, expensive sport utility vehicle. A small crowd of our wealthy, gossiping neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, pointing and whispering behind their manicured hands. Julian lost his mind. He sprinted across the pavement, waving his arms frantically and shouting at the tow truck operator to put his car down. The burly driver barely glanced at him. He calmly pulled a thick clipboard from his vest and held up the official repossession order, boldly displaying the voluntary surrender authorization I had initiated. Since Julian's name was nowhere on the financing documents, he had zero legal standing to stop the process. He was forced to stand there on the sidewalk, red-faced and hyperventilating, while his primary source of false status was hauled away down the busy city avenue. Defeated, emasculated, and visibly sweating, the two brothers retreated to the safety of the luxury apartment. They assumed they could at least hide away, order some cheap delivery food, and figure out a plan. They were wrong. Because I had legally terminated the lease under the unauthorized occupant clause, the property management team acted with ruthless corporate efficiency. The building operated on a centralized smart grid system. At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the building manager deactivated the unit from the master control room. Julian was sitting on the sofa, scrolling angrily on his phone, when the high-speed wireless internet router suddenly flashed red and died. 10 seconds later, the central air conditioning unit shuddered and powered down. Then, with a definitive click, every single light bulb in the apartment extinguished. When Marcus went to the kitchen sink to splash cold water on his face, the faucet sputtered out a few pathetic drops before running completely bone dry. In the span of a single afternoon, 2 grown men had been violently thrown back to the Stone Age. They were stranded in a high-rise concrete box that was rapidly heating up in the late afternoon sun, devoid of water, power, and connectivity. Panic finally shattered Julian's arrogant facade. He pulled out his smartphone and frantically dialed my number. He was met with a single, hollow ring, followed by the dead, automated silence of a blocked connection. He tried texting. The messages failed to deliver. He logged into every social media platform imaginable, desperately searching for my profile, only to find that he had been completely erased from my digital existence. I was gone, and I had taken the entire life support system with me. The suffocating heat in the dark apartment began to rise, and so did the tension. Marcus, dripping with sweat and entirely stripped of his promised luxury, turned on his younger brother. You told me you had this handled, Marcus growled, his voice echoing off the dark, empty walls. You said she was just some stupid lady who would pay for everything you dragged me across the country for a free ride, and now we are sitting in the dark with absolutely nothing. Julian tried to defend himself, his voice cracking with desperation and fear, but the damage was done. The invincible bond of brotherly solidarity had officially fractured. The trap was fully sprung, and they were the ones who had willingly locked the cage. Cornered animals always make the most noise before they realize the trap is completely shut, with no electricity, no water, and his luxury vehicle impounded. Julian resorted to the predictable playbook of a desperate narcissist. He weaponized his victimhood. He found a coffee shop 2 blocks away, leeching off their free wireless internet to flood his social media feeds and message our mutual friends. He crafted a masterful, pathetic narrative. He claimed his family was going through a severe crisis and that I, his supposedly loving partner, had abandoned him in his darkest hour. He painted me as a cold-blooded, money-hungry monster who discarded him the second his bank account dipped. My phone lit up with messages from acquaintances demanding to know how I could be so cruel. I did not engage in the public spectacle. I did not write a single angry comment. As a data analyst, I know that truth does not need a megaphone. It only requires irrefutable evidence. I silently compiled a highly encrypted digital folder. I selected exactly 6 key individuals in our social circle, the ones known for having the biggest mouths and the least amount of discretion. I sent them the access code. Inside the folder were pristine, scanned copies of Marcus's massive debt collections, the photographs of the ruined credit scores, and the legal proof that I had been funding Julian's entire existence for 24 months. The public narrative flipped within a matter of hours. Julian's carefully constructed martyrdom crumbled into absolute social humiliation. But the financial devastation and the social exile were merely the surface layer of my retaliation. The true devastation lay in a terrifying secret I had uncovered weeks before Marcus even stepped foot in my apartment. It was a secret that elevated them from mere freeloaders to active criminals. My discovery had happened by pure accident. One Tuesday afternoon, I had checked the mailbox and found a thick, official-looking envelope from the State Tax Franchise Board. It was not addressed to me, nor was it addressed to Julian. It was addressed to a corporate entity named Horizon Core Ventures, registered precisely to my apartment number. A normal person might have marked it as the wrong address and thrown it away, but my entire career is based on investigating anomalies. I logged into the state's Public Business Registry database and ran a detailed background search on Horizon Core Ventures. The results chilled me to the bone. The company listed 2 executive officers, Julian and Marcus. They had not just been living off my paycheck, they had been actively using my pristine residential address and my flawless credit association to register a fraudulent shell company. They were running a sophisticated investment scam, securing seed money from amateur angel investors. By projecting the illusion of a successful tech startup operating out of a luxury high-rise building, Marcus moving in was never about family bonding or starting over. It was a panicked retreat. He had burned through the stolen investor capital in his previous city and was fleeing across state lines to physically hide at the shell company's registered headquarters, hoping to consolidate their lies under my roof. They thought they were incredibly smart. They thought my apartment was an impenetrable fortress shielding them from the legal consequences of their fraud. They did not realize that by officially terminating my lease and severing my name from the property, I had unknowingly pulled the final pin from their grenade. When I broke the lease, the property management software automatically updated the municipal residential database. The sudden change of primary tenancy triggered an automatic red flag across several financial credit bureaus and legal tracking systems. The camouflage was instantly stripped away. The angry investors, the defrauded creditors, and the private investigators who had been desperately hunting for Horizon Core Ventures finally got a confirmed, active hit on their location. The nightmare for the 2 brothers began on the 3rd night of sitting in the sweltering, dark apartment. According to the building's security logs, The quiet atmosphere of the hallway was shattered at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. Heavy, aggressive footsteps marched down the corridor. Then came the violent, deafening pounding on the heavy oak door. It was not a polite knock. It was the furious hammering of people who wanted their money back. "We know you are in there. Julian," a rough voice shouted through the wood, echoing terrifyingly down the empty hall. "You owe us $200,000. Open the door." Julian and Marcus cowered in the pitch-black living room, paralyzed by sheer terror. They did not dare breathe. They could not turn on a television to drown out the noise. They could not call building security because they were technically trespassing in an apartment they had no legal right to occupy. They were entirely trapped in a claustrophobic box of their own making. Every single day, the siege intensified. The crack under the front door became a delivery slot for pure anxiety. Thick, threatening envelopes were shoved underneath. Official court subpoenas printed on heavy stock paper, aggressive demand letters from high-priced litigation attorneys, and final warnings from private collection agencies piled up on the foyer floor like a mountain of undeniable guilt. Every shadow in the unlit apartment felt like an intruder. Every creak of the building's foundation made them jump. The psychological pressure of being hunted, combined with the unbearable heat and the lack of basic hygiene, created a toxic, suffocating atmosphere. Under the crushing weight of impending legal doom, the primal instincts of survival kicked in, and there is no honor among thieves. On the fifth night of their miserable isolation, while Julian finally drifted into an exhausted, fitful sleep on the living room rug, Marcus made his move. The older brother, the supposed priority of the family, proved exactly what his loyalty was worth, moving with the silent desperation of a cornered rat. Marcus crept into the bedroom. He rummaged through Julian's designer travel bag. He found the fake gold luxury watch Julian wore to pretend he was rich. He took it. He found Julian's emergency cash stash, exactly $450 hidden in a sock. He took every single bill, without waking his brother, without leaving a note. Marcus quietly unbolted the front door. He slipped out into the dark, humid night, abandoning his younger brother to face the devastating avalanche of legal and financial ruin entirely alone. Julian woke up on the hard, dusty floor to the blinding morning sunlight. The apartment was an oven. When he reached for his emergency cash and his watch, his hand found only empty fabric. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, his own flesh and blood. The brother he had demanded I support had robbed him blind and fled into the night. Julian was entirely, profoundly alone. He had no money, no functioning phone, no vehicle, and no allies. Worse, the heavy footsteps and aggressive pounding on the front door resumed. The creditors were back, and their voices were louder and more violent than before. He was a prisoner in a glass cage, trapped between the sweltering heat inside and the furious mob outside. Driven by sheer, unadulterated panic, he managed to sneak out through the basement service stairwell, dodging the angry men loitering by the main entrance. He walked for nearly 2 hours under the blistering sun, his expensive designer clothes stained with sweat and dirt. His mind, entirely incapable of accepting personal responsibility, latched onto one final, cowardly strategy. He would go to my workplace. He knew that corporate professionals despised public scandals. He calculated that if he caused a massive, embarrassing scene in the middle of my prestigious office building, the pressure of the crowd would force me to submit. He genuinely believed I would pay anything just to make him go away and save my professional reputation. At exactly 11 o'clock in the morning, he burst through the revolving glass doors of the Meridian Core Analytics headquarters. The lobby was a massive, pristine expanse of polished white marble and chrome, filled with hundreds of sharply dressed executives and employees going about their day. Julian looked like a feral animal entirely out of place. "Kennedy!" he screamed, his voice cracking horribly as it echoed off the high ceilings. "Kennedy Fox, get down here right now." People stopped in their tracks. Whispers immediately broke out. He paced frantically in the center of the atrium, waving his arms, playing the role of the desperate, broken man wronged by a heartless corporate drone. I was already waiting, as a data analyst, anticipating human behavior is simply a matter of tracking historical patterns. Narcissists always return to their primary source of supply when their secondary options evaporate. I stepped out from behind the towering glass security barriers. I was wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, my posture rigid, my expression completely blank. I did not rush toward him to hush his shouting. I did not show a single ounce of embarrassment. I simply raised my right hand and calmly waved. Two massive, uniformed building security officers immediately flanked me. In my left hand, I held a crisp, neatly folded document. It was a formal, court-issued restraining order, expedited and signed by a judge less than 24 hours prior, explicitly barring Julian from coming within 500 feet of me or my place of employment. Seeing me approach with armed guards, Julian's aggressive facade completely disintegrated. The psychological collapse was absolute and immediate. The arrogant tech entrepreneur vanished, replaced by a pathetic, terrified child. His knees buckled. He collapsed onto the cold marble floor, right in front of dozens of my silent, staring colleagues. "Kennedy, please," he sobbed, real tears streaming down his grimy face. He clasped his hands together, begging like a desperate prisoner. "You have to help me. Marcus took everything. He stole my money. He dragged me into this mess. It was all his fault. I swear to you, please, just give me one more chance. We can start over. I will do anything you want." He was practically hyperventilating, his dignity entirely stripped away. He expected pity. He expected the empathetic woman who had paid his bills for 2 years to magically resurrect and save him from drowning. I walked slowly until the toes of my leather heels were inches from his trembling knees. I looked down at him. My eyes held absolutely zero warmth. There was no anger left, only the cold, hard satisfaction of a perfectly executed equation. I leaned down slightly, making sure my voice was quiet but sharp enough to slice through his pathetic sobbing. "Family is the #1 priority," I whispered, repeating the exact words he had used to seal his own fate. "You take care of it." He stared up at me, his mouth opening and closing in silent horror as the true finality of my words registered in his brain. Before he could utter another pathetic plea, the shrill, deafening wail of police sirens pierced the air outside the building. Red and blue lights flashed aggressively through the massive glass lobby walls. Julian scrambled backward on the floor, his eyes wide with a new, much darker terror. He thought I had called the police to remove him for trespassing. He was wrong again. 4 city police officers stormed through the revolving doors. They bypassed the building security completely. They marched straight toward Julian, their expressions grim and unyielding. They were not here to disperse a nuisance. They were here to execute a felony arrest warrant. The financial fraud allegations tied to his illegal shell company had officially caught up to him, as they forcefully grabbed his arms, hoisted him off the floor, and violently clicked the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. His screams of sheer desperation echoed through the silent lobby. Even in police custody, facing multiple felony charges for financial fraud, Julian could not suppress his fundamental nature. Cornered and desperate, he attempted one final, incredibly cowardly maneuver. Sitting in the sterile, windowless interrogation room at the downtown precinct, he tried to throw me directly under the proverbial bus. He explicitly told the investigating detectives that I was the actual mastermind behind the entire operation. His logic was as pathetic as it was predictable, because the luxury apartment where the fraudulent shell company, Horizon Core Ventures, was legally registered was leased entirely in my name. He argued that I had to be the criminal architect. He painted himself as an innocent, naive partner who was simply following the orders of his manipulative corporate girlfriend. His desperate lie bought him exactly 2 hours of false hope. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I walked through the heavy glass doors of the police station. I was not alone, and I was certainly not intimidated. Flanking my right side was Arthur Sterling, a highly aggressive, top-tier corporate defense attorney I had retained weeks in advance. We were escorted into a small observation room connected to Julian's interrogation chamber. The lead investigator, a visibly exhausted detective with a thick gray mustache, stepped out to meet us. He held a legal notepad and looked at me with deep suspicion, ready to read me my rights based on Julian's fabricated testimony. "Miss Fox," the detective started, his tone heavy with authority. "Your former partner is making some very serious allegations regarding your involvement in an unregistered securities scam." My lawyer did not even let him finish the sentence. "Mr. Sterling calmly opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, impeccably organized binder. He slid it across the metal table toward the detective. "Detective," my lawyer said smoothly, "before you waste taxpayer resources chasing a phantom, I strongly suggest you review the exact timeline of my client's actions. What you have in front of you is a certified, time-stamped dossier." I stepped forward, looking through the one-way glass at Julian, who was slumped in his metal chair, chewing his fingernails in pure anxiety. "I am a data analyst, detective," I stated clearly, my voice devoid of any emotion. "I do not leave loose ends. Exactly 30 days ago, I discovered a tax notice addressed to that shell company in my mailbox. I did not confront Julian. Instead, 29 days ago, I filed a comprehensive, encrypted whistleblower report directly with the State Attorney General's Office for Financial Crimes. The receipt for that submission is on page 1. The detective looked down, his eyes widening slightly as he read the official state seal on my printed emails. "Furthermore," I continued, "Julian claims I was orchestrating this from my apartment, but my departure from that residence was not a random argument. It was a legally documented eviction initiated by him." I reached into my pocket and placed a small digital audio recorder on the table. I pressed play. The pristine, high-definition audio filled the small room. Julian's arrogant, condescending voice echoed loudly through the speaker. "Marcus is moving in with us, permanently. Family is the #1 priority. You take care of paying these off, and if you do not like it, the door is right there. You can move out." Then, my own calm voice replied, "Understood." I stopped the recording. The silence in the room was absolute. "As you can clearly hear," I told the detective, "I was issued an ultimatum to pay off his brother's fraudulent debts or leave my own home. I chose to leave. I officially terminated my lease that very night, legally severing myself from the premises and their operation. Every action I took over the past week was a carefully structured protocol to protect myself from his impending criminal collapse. I did not flee. I stepped out of the blast radius." The detective closed the binder. The suspicion in his eyes vanished entirely, replaced by a look of sheer, begrudging respect. He picked up the folder, nodded to my lawyer, and walked straight back into the interrogation room. Through the glass, I watched the exact moment the detective tossed the thick dossier onto the table right in front of Julian. I watched the detective point toward the one-way mirror. Even though Julian could not see me, he knew I was there. The detective leaned in and explained everything. He explained the whistleblower emails. He mentioned the audio recording. He systematically destroyed every single lie Julian had just told. The physical transformation was astonishing. Julian completely collapsed inward. His shoulders slumped, his jaw went slack, and his eyes glazed over with a hollow, absolute emptiness. The terrifying realization finally washed over his arrogant brain. He was never the apex predator manipulating a blind, compliant woman. He was merely a pathetic, arrogant puppet. I had seen every single string, and I had used his own ridiculous ego to make him dance his way straight into a prison cell. He had dug his own grave, and I had simply handed him a bigger shovel. I did not need to see any more. The equation was balanced. The data was finalized. I turned my back on the glass window and walked out of the police precinct. I pushed the heavy metal doors open and stepped directly into the brilliant, golden sunlight of a perfect American afternoon. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second and took a massive, deep breath. The suffocating weight I had carried for 2 years was entirely gone. The air tasted like absolute, unadulterated freedom. It rushed through my veins, electrifying every nerve. I smiled, a genuine, powerful smile. I walked across the street and clicked the electronic fob to my brand new, sleek sedan. I slipped into the driver's seat, gripping the smooth leather steering wheel. I started the engine, leaving the pathetic, ruined failure far behind me in the shadows where he belonged. I pulled out into the flowing city traffic, driving relentlessly forward into a future where I would never, ever pay the price for anyone else's stupidity again. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Zoe Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.